Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Congregation of Westchester and our online worship service. My name is Cheryl Pittenger, and I'm the lay associate for this service. Our minister, Reverend Don Schatz, is on leave this week. Today, instead of a sermon, we'll have a one-woman play that middle and older kids may enjoy as well as adults. The Wife of Jonah by Barbara Rohde was last published in The Inner Journey, Views from the Jewish Tradition, and was edited by Rabbi Jack Bemerad as part of the Parabola Anthology series. The monologue will be performed by the author's daughter, Reverend Kate Rohde, our own UCWC Minister Emerita. I especially want to welcome any visitors to our online service this morning. We hope we will have a chance to get to know you. You can say hello in the comments or go to ucwc.org or send us an email, welcome@ucwc.org, if you'd like more information about our congregation or if you'd like to be in touch directly. We hope that you will join us for our online social hour. The link and password are in connections, our email newsletter, and we'll put them in the comments for this service and on screen at the end of the service. Unitarian Universalism holds that great good comes from a wide diversity. So whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your heritage, and from wherever your beliefs spring, we are pleased that you are here. Let us walk a while together. We have a special announcement today. Our annual meeting of the UCWC membership will be held Sunday, June 6th, after the service starting at 11 a.m. via Zoom. The main items of business will be whether to approve the proposed statement of UCWC's mission, approving an annual budget, and voting on nominees for board and the nominating committees. All members and friends may attend. Only members who joined by May 6th of this year may vote. As a reminder, please check on connections and our online calendar for announcements and information on how to access our various online events. Our chalice lighting this morning is by Katie Romero Griffin. May the flame of this chalice, the symbol of our faith, connect us to all who have come before us, all who are with us in body and in spirit, and all who are yet to come into being. May it serve as a reminder of our unity and connection across all time and space. Our call to worship this morning is by Amaret Calloway. Enter with me the sacred space. Bring with you what is yours. A burdened heart, a joyous song, a wearied spirit, a seeking mind. Bring the gift of yourself to the altar. It is an honorable gift. Now it is time in our service for our Time for All Ages by Cassie Lengel, our Director of Lifetime Development.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now is the time in our service when we invite our children and youth to join those who have gathered here together as we listen to a very special Time for All Ages message. But first, as always, let's take a nice deep breath in together as we settle into our places. Ready? Excellent. Now today's service is going to be a play put on by none other than our very own congregants. We'll be witnessing a shortened form of the play, The Wife of Jonah. But wait, you might not be familiar with that story, so let's take a few minutes to tell it again here so we begin on the same page together. Get yourself comfy, grab your tea and maybe a stuffy, and put your feet up for a wild ride. So this story comes from the Bible and is used by Christian and Jewish traditions. It is the story of a man named Jonah, who was a prophet of God, meaning that he went around to different places and told people messages about what God wanted them to be doing. Well, one day, God told Jonah to go to the land of Nineveh and tell them to repent because they'd been acting very wicked. Well, Jonah might have been willing to go to other places, but he really didn't want to travel to Nineveh, for the people there were indeed very wicked, and they were enemies of his own people in Israel. So instead of doing what God asked him to do, Jonah got on a boat and sailed away in the exact opposite direction, trying to outrun God and the Ninevites. But God isn't easily outrun. God caused a storm to come up with huge waves that rocked the boat and threatened to break it up. The sailors got very scared and were worried they'd have to jump overboard when Jonah said he was the cause of the storm and that they should throw him overboard. Well, the sailors were pretty reluctant, but in order to save their boat, they threw Jonah into the water, and God made a huge whale come up and swallow Jonah whole. But don't worry, Jonah wasn't hurt. He sat inside the belly of that whale, very frightened, and he turned to the only thing that could save him now. He prayed to God. He praised God for being mighty and wonderful and hopefully forgiving so that maybe he could be saved. Then after 3 days and 3 nights, God caused the whale to spit Jonah up onto dry land again. And God asked Jonah for the second time to go to the people and tell them in Nineveh to repent. Well, after all he had been through, Jonah agreed and went to Nineveh. And when he got there, he went part of the way into the city and yelled that Nineveh had 40 days or it would be destroyed. Not quite the message God had in mind, but it worked. The people of Nineveh, from the king all the way down to the lowly, put on rough sackcloth and ashes to show how sorry they were, and they called out to God to forgive them. Meanwhile, Jonah stomped angrily up to a high hill to watch and wait for the city of Nineveh to be destroyed. He sat down and got comfy, but was soon very hot because of the sun. So God made a bush grow up next to him so he would have shade, and for a while Jonah was very happy. But the bush too withered in the sun, and Jonah got very frustrated that it should be destroyed. So God asked him, "Why are you so upset about a bush that you didn't even grow in the first place? Why shouldn't I be upset about destroying the whole city of Nineveh, which I have created and I have loved?" So God forgave the Ninevites, and Jonah learned an important lesson.
Please join me in singing hymn number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dewfall on the green grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness, where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight the morning, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
And now's the time for our unison affirmation. Please join. We gather, aspiring to be a thriving, caring, and welcoming community that supports each person's spiritual journey, embraces diversity, challenges us to live responsibly, and is a catalyst for a just and compassionate world. Instead of a sermon this morning, we will have a story. The wife of Jonah is a first-person account from Jonah's wife on the real story of the prophet. Author Barbara Rohde imagined a woman's perspective on Yahweh, his prophet, and her part in bringing forth God's transformations.
You do not know my name, nor could you guess it by looking at me. You would guess Leah, I think, the weary one, or Miriam. It would not be fair to merely call me Jonah's wife. Most of you do call me Jonah's wife, for that is not a name. I am Shoshana, the graceful lily. You see why you would not have guessed. My thighs are heavy now, my skin no longer fair. There are moments that I feel within me a great gift that I call grace, but I cannot walk it now. I cannot dance it. In the river, I am graceful. I try to imagine how it would be to move always as I move when I'm in the river. When I think about that, I think I better understand what Jonah used to tell me about his voice, how when he was alone in the wilderness, far from the noise of people and the cares of dailiness, the voice was clear within him. But when he began to walk back into the noise and the dailiness, the voice became fainter and fainter. He said the fact that he could hear the voice at all is what made him a prophet. But the fact that the voice became quieter, as the voice of a singing mother when her child slips into sleep, is what made him a bumbling prophet. Oh, Shoshana, he said to me once in the middle of the night, it is a terrible thing to be a prophet. I held him in the night and I stroked him. Once I asked Jonah, why can't I hear the voice? God needs you for other things, he said. You bring forth the sons and the daughters. You keep them from the wildness. You nourish them. You comfort them. Without you, God's world would be a barren rock. I laughed. The idea that God needed me, or even Jonah, seemed absurd. My father and my father's father had taught me that we are the ones who need Yahweh. Jonah did not like my laughter. God has no belly, Shoshana, to hold the little ones. God has no hands to plant the grain or to harvest. He has no tongue. That is why his words sound in my head. You must understand, Shoshana, we are the belly and the tongue. But later, After one of those times when Jonah was with me, but not really with me, when he sat brooding for hours at a time and never looked at me, but seemed to be looking at something far beyond me, it was then that I asked the innocent question that I came to understand had haunted Jonah from the very first moment he heard the voice. How do you know that it is the voice of God? When I asked that question, he heard me. He looked at me, truly seeing me. I know, the same way you know that the tiny movement within your belly is a child that will, on a particular day, be forced from your body and be cut from you forever and grow and become a man. I thought about that. I thought I understood. But then I could not be sure I truly understood. I remembered the woman in the next village whose belly had grown as mine had grown with Aaron, who sang as I had sung with the joy of the child that was to come. And then she had fallen in death. And people said it had not been a child within her, but a sickness, that she had been walking through her days with death growing inside her, not life. Sometimes I awoke in the middle of the night and asked myself the question that never came out in the sunlight. Is Jonah a prophet, or is he mad? But what you want to know about is the story of Jonah and the fish. That silly story that people keep telling over and over and seem to want to believe. It began this way. Jonah could not sleep well when he came back from his long journeys into the wilderness. He lay awake most of the night, and only toward morning did sleep finally seize him. And then he slept late into the day, and I had to struggle to shade his eyes from the light and to keep Aaron from running to him. What is wrong with you, Jonah? I would ask, but he told me nothing. He lay staring into the dark. He spent long hours at prayer, but when he rose from his knees, there was no peace in him. He paced back and forth beside the fire, and he spat into it so that the flames shifted. Finally, after days of this, he took my hands in both of his, and he spoke with a kind of agony. I must go to Nineveh. I could not believe what he was saying. Nineveh is a city far to the north of us, a great city, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. We had heard tales of its great size, but more of its great wickedness. I felt fear enter me. Nineveh would not open its arms in welcome to Jonah, the son of Amittai. Why must you go to Nineveh, Jonah? I must warn them of God's anger. I must ask them to repent. Jonah spoke with strength, but I knew it was not a strength that came from the depth of him, but one he put on like a splint on a weak leg. I knew how afraid he was. Are you afraid? I asked. I've learned that one becomes stronger as one faces one's weakness. I am afraid, Shoshana. They will not listen to my preaching, or if they listen, they will laugh. Or if they do not laugh, their anger will seize them. They will curse me or stone me. They may put me to death in their anger. And will God not protect you from your enemies? I asked. Jonah looked at me strangely. I knew he'd been thinking about that question. He spoke quietly then. But Shoshana, what if it's only the sight of my mangled body that will bring them to repentance? What if I must be the sacrificial lamb? We stood in silence, then our hands still clasped. Then he pulled his hands away angrily, turned his back, and cried out in a kind of pain, "No, I will not go." A blackness was in him, as if the death he feared in Nineveh had found him out here. His eyes grew empty. He sat for long hours saying nothing. I tried to bring him into the light again. I offered him fruit. I sang his favorite songs very softly while I was at my work. Finally, one morning I felt his hand on my shoulder, and I roused from my sleep and saw that he had prepared for a journey. I did not beg him to stay. I didn't ask where he was going. I thought it was to Nineveh. I kissed him and waited until he was out of sight before I let my tears fall. Now I must tell you of the day that Jonah returned. There were many who told me that Jonah would never return. Some said he'd been put to death in Nineveh. Others said he'd been seen on the docks of Joppa, setting sail in a great ship going to the edges of the world. There were those who claimed that ship had gone down in a storm. Still, I believed he would return. Each morning when I awoke, I believed it would be the day of his return. Each night I would think, tomorrow. And then one day, it was the day. I looked up from mixing bread and saw a speck in the distance growing larger and larger, and soon I could see that it was he. I did not even wipe my hands. I ran towards him, laughing and crying at the same time, not even heeding Aaron's calling after me as he ran far behind. And then we met, Jonah and I. And then we stepped apart and stared at each other, trying to see in one another's faces what had happened since last we were together. I knew the blackness had gone out of Jonah. His eyes were filled with love, though I do not think it was love only for me. I had the sense that his eyes would have held love for whatever he looked on at that moment. He looked older somehow and seemed at once both stronger and more gentle, the way a woman does after she's brought forth her firstborn, full of the knowledge of the marriage of pain and joy. We walked back together, and when we met Aaron, Jonah lifted him up onto his shoulders, and Aaron shrieked with delight and held on to Jonah's hair as if it were the mane of an animal, and my heart was full of thanksgiving. We lay awake into the night while Jonah told me his story. I'll try to remember his words and tell you, for they're very different from the story you have heard about the fish. When I left you, Shoshana, it was as if I were fleeing from myself or from the eye of God. That was the madness in me. I had told myself that it was not God's voice that had sent me to Nineveh, but at the same time, I knew it was God's voice. I thought that if I sailed far away, far from our own country, as far as Tarshish, which is the edge of our world, then the voice could not follow me, nor God's eye see me, and I would find peace. So I went to Joppa and went from ship to ship, looking for one setting sail for Tarshish, that would take me on board. And I finally found one, and we sailed toward the place where the sun disappears. There were strange men on that ship, men who did not know our God, but spoke of other gods who seemed like silly little men. When we sailed into a storm, they said their gods were angry, and the only way to appease them was to throw the sailor into the sea who had offended the gods. They did not consider why the gods were offended, nor try to discover what the offense might be with the skills of their own minds. They decided to draw lots to see which of them should be cast overboard. You may find this hard to believe, Shoshana, for even now I find it hard to believe about myself, but in that moment, I wanted to die. There was an emptiness within me, as if someone had taken a knife and carved a great hole from my very center, so that the pain was so terrible I would do anything to end it, even if it meant ending my life. So I asked the sailors to throw me into the sea. They were afraid to do that, to follow my word rather than the word of fate. But I told them I knew I had offended my God, and that surely it was my God who had sent the storm. Finally, they did as I asked. There were two of them who seized my arm and to my feet, and they swung me and threw me from the ship. I fell into the blackness of the water from which I thought I never would arise again. There was no fish, Shoshana, no fish that swallowed me. Somehow in a daze, I clung to a log and was washed ashore far from any village. The God that I had sought to escape was right there within me. It's strange how when one seeks death and does not find it, the pain of life becomes even more unbearable. And I felt a great guilt for my longing towards death, the death of my body and the death of my spirit. Something deep within me knew that in hiding from God's judgment, I hid also from his love. And that was the terrible emptiness I felt in my belly. But finally, I begged God to look at me. And in that moment, I had the sense that God came into the depths of my hell and whispered in my ear, sound of my own heart beating, the heartbeat of life. I turned over on the sand and looked up toward the sun. I closed my eyes against its power, but at the same time, I let its power caress and heal me. I looked toward the sea, which seemed so gentle now, tender as a mother. The waves lapped at the shore. I walked down and bathed myself in those waters and then started walking along the edge of the sea until I found a small village. I must have looked very strange, my clothes in shreds, my body bruised. You must have come from the bottom of the sea, the people said. Or the belly of a whale, I said, laughing. Perhaps they believed me. Then I found a small ship that brought me back to Joppa and to you. Jonah and I lived simply and contentedly for a time. Everything filled with a quiet joy, the simple acts of eating, bathing, and singing to Aaron, and lying down together at the end of the day of work had a kind of gleam to them. Jonah no longer seemed tormented nor troubled. His heart was not divided. Still, the story he had been swallowed by a fish persisted. At first, he tried to correct the story. No, he would say, I was not in the belly of a whale for 3 days. I was not vomited out on the shore. I don't know where you got that idea. But the more he denied it, the more it seemed to spread. Finally, he just gave up. What does it matter? He asked me. I think he enjoyed the fame a little, the way the people looked at him when he walked in the market. There had been a miracle, and Jonah had been at the center of it. Perhaps it was partly the persistence of that tale that caused the change in him. I began to notice it after he'd been home for a while. It is hard to describe it exactly, but I had the sense he was turning things upside down. What became important to him was not that he'd heard God's voice, but that he had heard God's voice. For some reason, he began to think that God had chosen him not because God needed a man to be a messenger upon the earth, but because he, Jonah, was so great in God's eyes, so eloquent, so strong, so faithful. A strange arrogance came over him, and I found I was angry. It frightened me as well as angered me because I feared Jonah's head would become so filled with the sound of his own words that he would no longer be able to hear his voice. When Jonah told me that he decided that he would go to Nineveh, that this time he would truly go, that he would dare the wrath of the people, that he would rebuke them for their dreadful wickedness and warn them of the punishment of the just one, I was frightened by his fervor. I did not say much, but I tried to remind him of how he had felt lying in the sun on the shore of the sea after he'd been thrown from the ship. I tried to recall to him the serenity of God's love. He did not want to remember. He was too filled with his sense of mission. He had reached that place where he could no longer tell the difference between righteousness and self-righteousness. And yet, the long, solitary journey he took to Nineveh must have softened him a little. By the time he reached Nineveh, I suspect he spoke with a double voice, his own voice, the voice of a small and arrogant man. But deep within that voice, another voice, the voice that held the truth of God. If that had not been so, the Ninevites would never have turned their faces in a new direction. If all they had heard had been the words of a little self-satisfied man, fat with a sense of his own importance, they could have laughed them off or ignored them with a defensive outrage. There must have been something in what he said or in the way he said it that made them lie awake at night and wonder, and when they arose in the morning, made them see each other and themselves in a new way. Never before had such a thing happened. A whole city felt the foolishness of its past. I wish I had been there to talk to the people. It is hard for me to imagine what it had been like. And I suppose if the king himself takes off his rich robes and dresses as simply as a herdsman, if the king himself laughs at all the absurd past pretensions of his reign, the emptiness of his longing for power, then it is easier for the people. Jonah prophesied that Nineveh would be destroyed in 40 days. At the end of 40 days, Nineveh was still there, but it was a different Nineveh. I thought Jonah would come home rejoicing, but he came home angry, with an anger that turned into despair. He sat in silence, not showing any life in his eyes. It all seemed very strange to me. What's wrong with you, Jonah? I'd asked, but he only stared at the earth and said nothing. But I sat with him in his blackness and tried to understand what had happened in Nineveh. When Aaron was asleep, I would go off by myself and stare at the patterns of the clouds or the patterns in the sand, and little by little, I began to think things I had not thought before. Finally, I went to Jonah. I sat down before him and looked into his face. You are a prophet, Jonah, not a fortune teller. I saw his face turn red. I knew anger toward me was rising within him. Still, I continued. While I had been staring at the sand and skies, I remembered the day that Aaron was born, how hard it had been to let go of myself long enough to get the task done. How long it had taken me to learn to ride with the pain rather than to try to control it. And I remembered that other thing, that sense of how something had used me to bring forth this child. At the moment of his cry, I had shouted exultantly, I've done it. And for a moment, I felt a strong pride. But then, in an instant, my attention was upon Aaron, and my pride was for Aaron, our son. I tried to speak all of this to Jonah. It was difficult to speak these things, to find the words and the courage. Don't you remember how much joy we felt when all the people came to see our son? We did not want them to look at us. We did not want praise for my labor. We wanted them to see the beauty of Aaron, to joy with us in our joy. Don't you remember, Jonah? Jonah lifted his hand, and for a moment I thought he would strike me. But instead, he held his hand in the air for a very long time, and finally touched my cheek with it very gently. And he said, Oh, Shoshana, my graceful lily. Even now, there are times when Jonah and I are in the market square and we see one person nudge another and whisper, and we know they are saying, There's Jonah, the one who was swallowed by the fish. Jonah has stopped trying to deny or explain. Let them have their miracles, he says. In his older years, he's become much mellower. I am the one who wants to remind them of the real miracles of our son, Aaron, and of our daughter, Rebecca, and of Aaron's son, but most of all, of the miracle of Nineveh, the city that for some reason had ears to hear and overnight regained its sanity. It never happened before, I say. It may never happen again. It will happen again, Jonah says. Everything is possible. Meanwhile, people would rather hear stories of fish swallowing men and vomiting them up again than stories of men learning to love. I suppose Jonah is right. Still, I've never liked the story of Jonah and that fish. That's the reason I'm telling you the story of Jonah's wife.
We've had a couple of wonderful stories and some wonderful music. We are very grateful for all the gifts that our members that are keeping us going and keeping us able to do these services. While we are online, you can donate on the web, by text, by app, or mail a check to UCWC. And if you can add a bit to what you pledge monthly, we are very grateful. Thank you for all of these gifts and your generosity in every form. We will now receive the morning offering. For these gifts and all that we give to our many communities, we are truly grateful. As we move into the time of caring and sharing for our congregation, please join us in singing hymn 1009, a meditation on breathing.
When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love.
Good morning. My name is Christy Judge. I'm a member of the Pastoral Care Team and the contact for the month of May. We have one card of sorrow today, from one who deeply mourns the loss of someone so important in her life that words can hardly convey the sorrow, the memories, the gifts to be unwrapped and enjoyed over and over again. A life gone forth with spread wings to soar into places unknown. And as always, a candle is lit for those cards of sharing not expressed. Thank you.
We sing again, meditation on breathing.
When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love.
Our closing words are by Philip Randall Giles. Now may our wisdom show itself in compassion and understanding, and may the fruits of the Spirit be apparent in our lives. Thank you for joining us today. Please join us online for the social hour on Zoom after our postlude.